talk about this is Republicans overseas spokesperson Erol Morkoc. Erol, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Erol, it is a requirement, isn't it, of the Constitution that anyone can carry a gun. I mean, this is the design fault, isn't it, of the Constitution, isn't it?
Well, you can call it a design fault, but it's designed for a purpose. It's designed to essentially allow for a well-regulated militia and responsible citizens to be a check and balance against tyranny. Keep in mind, the United States government is the largest global superpower in the world. If you were to eliminate the Second Amendment, there is no checks and balances on the leadership of the country. But the Second Amendment isn't what's needing to be destroyed here. The Second Amendment is something that's ingrained in our fabric of our country. What we need to look at is very common sense things that Donald Trump raised during the 2016 primary. As you know, an 18-year-old today is not the same thing as an 18-year-old 50 years ago. My mother graduated in 1969. There was a shooting club in the school. You would bring your rifle and shoot and take it home. You had no mass shootings. We have a cultural failure that has outpaced the rate of what adulthood is. So we need to start looking at what can 18-year-olds be considered as, and a lot of people are agreeing, 18, 19, 20, 21, you can't get a beer. So why on earth are you able to, a non-military person with no training, obtain these weapons? And some of these simple, we have to take back the semantics using the terms like assault style. AR-15 stands for Armalite rifle. It's a brand. It doesn't stand for assault rifle. Most people don't know that.
Right.
Assault rifles aren't weapons of war. Automatic rifles are weapons of war, and they've been banned for 90 years, as President Biden said during his speech. So we need to start looking at, the red flag laws being actually able to be acted on these younger people.
But they're still killing weapons. I mean, they might not be used in the Ukraine at the moment, but they are killing weapons, and they cause devastating death. 19 children, 3 teachers. We can't ignore this.
Well, the weapons themselves are designed as killing weapons. Keep in mind, 90% of murders in this country are committed with handguns, which are a much more nefarious, problem in the countries, and most murders are committed by somebody who got something in their waistband. These mass shootings are a culmination of, there's people going into rabbit holes on the internet. They're isolated, they're alone. You have over half of the country on some forms of medication. You have a lot of medication. You have a lot of unregulated medication. You have incredible amounts of overdoses and cultural collapse in this country. And so while the guns are obviously the where the bullet comes out of, the people behind the guns are the ones who are looking at it. Now, I'm a card-carrying member of the NRA, and I'm the first to admit that we need to step back and look at some of these common sense ideas. Bring it into the discussion. Why couldn't perhaps, as people are worried about the government doing these checks and balances, maybe veterans groups could be the ones who are looking at these 18. I bought my first gun when I was 18. There was no training. They didn't require me to prove that I knew how to use a safety. Now, I went to a training class. I keep my gun locked up. Something that Mr. Biden really, I thought was a good idea was these lock-up gun rules. If you saw one of the shootings in the high schools, the parents have finally been arrested. They're just leaving these guns out. Their kids have mental problems, and there's no, punishment for that. So starting to crack down, at least on the youth aspect, is where you can. But you can't go after people who are 25 years old, adults who have the constitutional right in a country with 400 million plus guns and 10 times more magazines. Keep in mind, a magazine is a box with a spring that can be fabricated by anybody with common sense and welding. You need to shut down the southern border, for example, if you want to stop the proliferation of weapons. So it's as much as waving a wand would be nice, it's also not what the American people want because they don't trust their government. Democrats, Republicans, there's a reason why the Democrat or Republican Party can't come together on any of these gun legislation because their constituents on both sides. Take a state like New Hampshire, very Democrat state, but you have a lot of hunters.
So there are pragmatic ways of reducing the threat of these over and over tragedies in supermarkets, in churches, in synagogues, on the street involving police officers in Dallas, in schools over and over again. You're saying that it would not affect the Second Amendment if we could at least come up with some pragmatic control.
I think pragmatic control number one, you have to get everybody to agree. So you can't lecture to people.
No.
We have to all under one tent. It's not a Democrat, Republican issue. It's an American issue. And the place that we can start where these horrific, it's hard to say that a mass shooting of kindergartners on an ethical scale is worse than a mass shooting of people in a grocery store, but at least you can look at the age groups who are doing each of these actions. You might not be able to prevent, wanton terrorist attacks across the United States with 300 some million people, but we can look at what is an 18-year-old, what is a teenager these days, and look at the laws and say, hey, if you're non-military, I think you should need to prove that you can operate a weapon, and some competent people in our society need to be around you to verify that. And if those red flags, if you're a weirdo, if you're standing out making weird comments, you're not an adult. That's not an adult ownership. So we have to start the discussion with the age and build up, because nobody is agreeing, including President Trump way back in the primaries in 2016. I mean, he got vilified for it. The only guy who wasn't really in the big gun lobby pocket. I mean, he'll take the NRA's money, but he's not a lifelong politician. So this kind of an outside leadership aspect in the Republican Party is key, because it can't come just from a Democrat. It has to come bipartisan, or there's no hope. None whatsoever.
As a Republican overseas, let's talk about President Trump, because that was his major advantage, wasn't he? The guy was a super independent kind of chap, a rich man who was not in the pocket of anyone. I mean, that was his strength, wasn't it? That was his biggest selling point against other candidates from other parties, and indeed from his own.
Yeah, that was a huge part of what it was. He was almost a third-party candidate who came and broke a Republican, Democrat, Bush, Cheney, Obama, Clinton oligarchy. And first time in history, you had a non-statesman and non-war hero become president. And he had a lot of very liberal ideas. He was a card-carrying Democrat until 2008. And I think a lot of his supporters would say, if you asked me if I was a Democrat in 1990, I very well probably might have been, based on what the policies were. The John F. Kennedy Democrat wing of the party is closer to Trump than it is to the current Democrat wing of the party.
Is that typical of so many traditional left-leaning, I should say socially minded left-leaning politicians and people in this country who might have regarded themselves in the 80s and 90s as Labour voters have moved now towards conservative values with a small c rather than a big C? The idea that the world has changed, that conservatism is now the counterculture.
It is, and I'll give you a great example. I did my undergraduate at University of California, Berkeley, probably the most far left place you could go in America. You'd be shocked at how many people behind the White House doors were actually Berkeley graduates. If you came out of Berkeley, if you had any sort of free thought or libertarian beliefs or just discourse, belief in free speech, just even if you disagree, you were castigated as a right-wing fanatic. And so there is a counterculture pushback on that. And the country is not swinging more conservative. I'll give you a great example. The debate for abortions, right? That's always been a religious debate versus people who are saying we're modern, we're progressive. In our generation, it started to change. It started to say, well, hey, I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Muslim, but I'm kind of have a problem with maybe 30 weeks outside of pregnancy being terminated. Maybe I have some moral issues of how we're doing it, this and that. So you have now a secular debate involved in abortion that completely didn't exist before by people who been pro-abortion in the 80s and 90s who are now not anti-abortion, but the discussion is. So it is, America changes every 10 years. It's actually quite impressive.
It is phenomenal what's going on in the US and indeed over here. But let me ask you, Errol, in 15 seconds or more, maybe a little bit less, is Donald Trump going to be the man in 2024 to take on Biden in Trump Biden 2, the sequel?
Not only is he going to be the president, but some people read history, some people write history. Donald Trump makes history. I guarantee you he's going to run, and I've got money on it. So. Wow,
okay. So Erol Morkoc has money on that. The Republicans overseas spokesperson, Erol Morkoc. Thank you very much indeed for joining us right here on Talk TV in Platinum Jubilee weekend. Are you at a street party? Call us 0344 499 1000 because we're